here to see and celebrate, of course, is Katee Roberts, a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of a spicy romance. Entertainment Weekly calls their writing unspeakably hot. Their books have sold over 2 million copies. They live in the Pacific Northwest with their husband, children, a cat who thinks he's a dog, and 2 Great Danes who think that they are lapdogs.
They're so anxious too.
I think that big dogs that think that they're lapdogs are one of God's most special creations.
And they're so confused. They're like, why are you squawking? Stop it. I'm just trying to sit in your lap like the tiny baby that I am.
And they are, except for how they're not. So, for those who haven't yet cracked into Hunt on Dark Waters, what is this book about? What do they need to know just to get a briefing on this book?
Okay. I never know. Every time I'm asked this question, it's a different answer. So here we go. It's kind of my love song to Pirates of the Caribbean. Not like the specific, but like the feeling that you get when you watch Pirates of the Caribbean of like it's all possibility and like there should be more kissing. And also just it's a portal fantasy with a chaotic bisexual witch who's sort of on the run from her ex-vampire situationship. And she ends up on a sort of pirate boat with a very stoic man who thinks that he's on the side of good, but he is not. He's a paladin. He thinks he's good, but he's not. And she's going to show him the error of his ways. Also, he's telekinetic and uses it in sexy ways.
I have to tell you, whenever characters who have powers get into a romance and then don't use it in sexy ways, I really feel like there was an opportunity lost.
That almost happened. I was almost all the way through the edits, and I was like, "Oh no, it's Chekhov's telekinesis!" Like, I had to go back and like fix and expand some of the sex scenes because I couldn't do that, you know. And also, it could be the Dragon's Bride over again with people being like, "Katie, what are you doing?" I'm sorry, I fixed it this time.
I have to say that the way that you put it in is hot. It's really good.
I hope you all think so too.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit about just the concept of piracy and adventure on the high seas and why you think that kind of grips our hearts and minds in the way that it does.
Well, it's so like, it's just that kind of like lawlessness, but it's not really lawlessness because they have their own laws. They just, you know, they were still living in a colonial capitalist bullshit. And so sometimes they made it work for them and sometimes they worked against it. And it's just kind of, there's something really attractive about that. And just, it feels like, if you don't look too closely, like the scurvy and like how everyone probably smelled really terrible, it's very sexy. But I made my magic, and so there is no scurvy, and I'll smell really good.
I did admire how when Evelyn was introduced to life on a pirate ship, she's like, you know, I wanted to do this as a kid, and then I found out how stinky everyone was, and I was like, I don't know about that, but here they're funny.
Like we've all seen, or maybe we haven't all seen, whatever. If you've seen Black Sails or Pirates of the Caribbean, they're just that dirty looks good, but again, it doesn't translate in person. Like I don't want that. And so if I'm creating a magic world, it's going to have indoor plumbing and, you know, magic stuff like that.
Those guys are guaranteed stinky.
Yeah.
Otherwise. So you've worked a lot in the folklore reinterpretation space, and this book is kind of informed by Fae lore and other parts of folklore, but it seems like your characters like are a little further from like folkloric stories or folkloric kind of archetypes, and I'd love to hear how you think of this book as being similar to or different from your past books and series.
This book's a little bit more on the nose. So any kind of folklore or mythology or what have you, fairy tales, it's basically a game of telephone of the past. And even like the originals aren't necessarily like the first telling because they were oral traditions before somebody took a pen and paper and wrote them down to like pass around. And so each retelling of like a familiar story is just one more note in like the history or what will become history for this, for like Beauty and the Beast or whatever. Excuse me. With Hunt of Dark Waters, I kind of wanted to examine that like from a step to the right and just, it's like the Cunanun, which are the Hounds of the Noon, which is the Welsh underworld, and they ride with the Wild Hunt, or said to periodically. And it's like, okay, like, but what if that origin was that game of telephone? And what if they aren't literal hounds anymore, maybe? And what if they don't ride with Wild Hunt, but they hunt monsters? And so it's kind of like, how could that get twisted? And how could an enterprising council use that for their benefit to grab power? Because all of my stories end up being about that kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a really interesting narrative about how protection, like the philosophy or purpose of wanting to protect the world can turn into kind of can be used very despotically.
Someone when I was on tour for Cruel Seduction was like, so Bowen's a water cop. And I was like, oh, he is kind of, isn't he? Not for long. He sees the error of his ways. He's like, oh, I can fix things from the inside. It's like, no, buddy, no, you can't. And so, but yeah, it's just that idea of like, when does protection become like an enforcing on people who didn't ask for it? And like, who gets to decide who's a monster? And you know, it's certainly not the people who might be, or creatures or what have you. Like there's an encounter in the book where Evelyn kind of is not down with what's going on. And it's just, but it's that very much like, who gets to decide? And did you ask the people who you're protecting if they actually want to be protected by you? And you didn't ask, Bowen, what are you doing? And so, yeah, there's got to be a rebellion and they're the real pirates.
Yeah. I love the dynamic between Evelyn and Bowen and how they have this opposites attract kind of romance. What makes that so delicious?
It's so I will say that like I never found paladin type characters particularly attractive until I read T. Kingfisher's Paladin's Grace and like the other books in that series. And I was like, oh, I get it now. But they're most interesting because they tend to be like a very specific archetype, and they're so interesting when you throw them up against somebody who's like, but why? But why? and like he has what he feels are such strong morals, and her only morals are like what her grandmother instilled on her, which are not what you would call morals. It's like, don't mess with vampires. She can listen. Or, you know, that sort of things. Like you hear the little notions of her grandmother's rules throughout the book, and it's very much like it's apples and oranges. And so it was really fun to kind of, because they are each other's foil. Like she's so frustrated by him and like, why can't you just not be honorable and just do the other thing? And he's just like, why do you keep breaking your word and running away? So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to read, and kind of watching the sparks fly as this Flint and Tinder pair kind of bonk into each other is really delightful. Speaking of her grandmother, I noticed in this story the influence of older women being really strong. Like her grandmother informs her throughout everything that happens, and then on the ship's crew, there's a older woman who kind of reminds her of her grandmother, and I love that because I so rarely see like badass elder women or like portrayed in really any fiction.
Yeah, I really like the idea of like what happens when a unlikable heroine gets to an elderly age and like her last fuck is gone. And we kind of see that through the lens of Evelyn's memories of her grandmother, and she's still kind of grieving, even though it's been quite some time since her grandmother passed. And she was such an instrumental part of her life. But Dia is the older lady who's on I think she's the navigator, if I remember correctly. I should know this. But she's just like that same kind of like, there's no give a damn. Like once you get to a certain age, it's just like, this is who I am, deal with it. And if you don't want to deal with it, I will zap you the spell. And so it's really fun writing that and like how that interaction with Evelyn versus with Bowen and how they both really respect that age and that wealth of experience while there's some friction points with Bowen because of course there is.
Right. The man is a living, breathing friction point.
He is.
In more ways than one.
My editor said this book's kind of justice for Norrington, and like that kind of gives you the vibe of like he's trying his best, but he is just so like, what do you mean? Not every situation needs a hammer. I'm the hammer. I will hammer. No, stop it.
Yeah. So I have kind of a broader question, I think, which is, you have become so beloved in the space of romance at this very moment. How did you come to know and love the romance genre?
So I fell into it a little bit by accident. So many of my friends and peers have stories of like my grandmother, or mother, or aunt had, the paper bag of Harlequins. And I didn't have that because my mom was not a romance reader. But she did read suspense. And she just leave her paperbacks lying around. So I inevitably pick them up and read them. And so she was super into Iris Johansen. And so I went to the library and I was like, I liked this book about murder. What else you got for me? And I found The Magnificent Rogue. And I reread it recently a couple years back, and it is exactly as spicy as my like 12, 13-year-old. I was just like, what? No, surely it's not that scandalous. It is. It is that scandalous. And I immediately inhaled all of her historical romance. But like, I didn't realize that was an entire genre. Like that this is a thing that I could have found elsewhere. And so I kind of hopscotched my way around through like paranormal and like urban fantasy before realizing that my favorite bits of those books were the romance bits and the spicy kissy bits. And then sort of in like the early aughts, realized paranormal romance exists, and then realized that romance exists as like a whole thing, and from there it's history. But yeah, I would seek out like fantasy with like good romantic bits, but I didn't find the genre as a whole until I was a little bit older.
Yeah. And there's a lot of great gateways in fantasy kind of into romance.
We were just talking about Jacqueline Carey, and like Crucial Start was incredibly instrumental for me. I also, and this probably explains so much, I found Laurel Hamilton's Anita Blake series, but not book one. I think it's book like 9 Sterling Sins. My mom had picked that one up and been like, oh, this is not for me. And I was like, what is this? And I was like, oh my goodness. And then I just kept reading them. And so my threshold for bonkers is like so skewed.
She goes for it.
She does. And it's very interesting. I credit those books as well for a lot of the more eclectic things you find in my books.
I was actually kind of thinking that Evelyn and Bowen remind me a tiny bit of Phaedra and Jocelyn in Cushiel's Start.
A little bit, yeah.
Which, if you haven't read,
oh my gosh,
folks, it is phenomenal.
It's so good.
And everyone is bi.
Everyone's queer and they're kinky and a little bit of masochist. Like
including God.
Oh yeah, no, I read those books all the time. But yeah, I definitely, it's one of those things where like you have like books that imprint on your soul, and then you kind of find yourselves coming back to the parts that are your favorite in the stories you tell as well. And this definitely has a little bit of a similar feel in the dynamic that there you have like the stoic and then you have the chaos, except Phaedra is probably worse for Jocelyn's blood pressure than Evelyn is for blood pressure. Yeah, sorry, I'm going to continue being a spy / courtesan. Bye.
So right now, there's this big kind of boom for what people are calling romantasy. And I hear from people who really like the label romantasy and people who really don't like that label. How do you feel about it?
I think that it is very clear on what you're getting. Because like romantic fantasy versus fantasy romance are like two different things. And I'm all about managing reader expectation, which like, I mean, you're here because you like me, so you will like this book. But if somebody picks up this book that's expecting Crucial Start, they're going to be so disappointed because world building You don't need pages of it. I don't. But I like the term. I think that I hope that it stays true, if that makes sense. Like we went through a recent phase where everything was like the rom-com, and I'm like, no, this person has cancer in the first chapter. That is not funny.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be funny, but this is not funny. And like, so I hope that it, because of its popularity, doesn't just get slapped on absolutely everything where it becomes meaningless. But I also think that the people who shy away from putting the romance out there, like in labeling and stuff, don't really respect romance. And, you know, again, if they don't, then maybe those books aren't for them, and that's okay.
I do hear all the time, though, as a bookseller, that romance is the juggernaut that keeps publishing alive. So if you like books, think a romance reader or romance
And
reader.
it's such a wide and varied genre, and like, welcome to my TED Talk, but it's just anything that you like, you can find it within romance. Like sometimes you might have to do a little more digging, and there are definitely underrepresented voices and stories. But it's there and it's findable, and not all of them are super spicy, and there's just a wealth of types of stories, and like I think that's really magical. And and romance readers are voracious.
I have a question that's been on my mind throughout kind of reading this and exploring your work, which is we live in a society with a lot of hang-ups around sexuality, from like purity culture to homophobia to just like a lot of kind of psychic baggage. So when you get started writing erotica or writing romance, how was that kind of a journey for you to bust through that like wall of kind of socially enforced shame around sex?
To some degree it was, but most of my journey actually happened before I was published, because I was so certain I was not going to write romance. Like, no, that's not a thing I'm doing. And then I just kept doing it on accident. And so I finally started doing it on purpose. And I kind of fell into the higher spice sort of on accident, in that like I started my career when 50 Shades was like doing its thing really hardcore. And so my publisher at the time was like, do you want to do this for a living? And I was like, yes, I hate my job. I'm working minimum wage, it's terrible. And so they kind of we had discussed, and I had written essentially spec. My editor at the time was like, I want a wrong bed book that doesn't have cheating in it, which now you can find them all over the place, but at the time, I guess they were less common. And so I wrote this book for her, and it was spicy. And is it as spicy as right now? Not really, but like you kind of edge into it. But I also exist in a constant state of spite. And I grew up very religious, and the shame and all that stuff. And now I'm just like, no,
Yeah.
you can't tell me what to do. And also like, I really like writing queer normative books. I think it's nice to have the idea that there might be a world or a possibility of a future of our world where it just exists. It's not a thing. Like, you don't have to be like, it doesn't have to be a pain point that we're arguing over whether people like have the right to love who they want to love. And so I'm gonna write that in my books because they make me happy. And every time a bigot emails me hate mail, I just grow stronger.
Unlimited power.
I'm like, oh, you hate me with pronouns? Guess what?
I love that. I love that you have a character who uses neopronouns in this book. I love how queerness in Hunt on Dark Waters kind of just becomes part of the texture of the world. Like, Evelyn is bi, her vengeful athleisure wearing ex is a woman.
Yes.
By the way, I would love to know, my favorite thing, one of my favorite things about this is that the vampire ex, immediately we find out that she is an athleisure enthusiast.
She is. It was sort of, it just, yeah, like sometimes characters just arrive fully formed, and she's actually a holdover from nope, just kidding, Court of the Vampire Queen. She's Wolf's older sister, and it amused me greatly to have this terrifying, fierce, murderous lady who just really likes athleisure wear. And in my head, she kind of looks like, is it Allison from Orphan Black? The mom clone. Yeah, that's probably an old like reference, but
I got you.
thank you.
There we go.
You should check it out. It's great. But just like that, like the bouncy ponytail and just like totally put together and like, but you know, you can put quite like a bleacher word.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I love Lizzie to the point where I had to like edit a little bit because I was like, she's too attractive. They have too much chemistry. She's not the lead. She's the lead in the next book. Don't worry, I won't leave her behind.
That
Yes.
is thrilling news.
Yes, her love interest is a Selkie who's lost her skin, and it's morality chain. So
I'm gonna McFreaking lose it.
yeah. I wanted to write a Selkie story for a really long time. Sorry, we're tangenting. Here we go. I love Selkie stories, but forever ago on Tumblr there was like a post that made the rounds, or maybe just I saw it. It was talking about like this theoretical, like if swan shifters happen across the Selkie, and swans are very deeply scary, and like the idea that they would be bruisers and would go like chase down whoever told the Selkie stole the Selkie skin. And like that dynamic has like sat in my head for a really long time, and it's why someday I will write swan shifters. But in the meantime, I gave my Selkie a very scary vampire, and you know, maybe the Selkie isn't everything that you expect her to be either. So it was a lot of fun.
When do we know when?
May. It'll be actually, yes, it's all edited and everything, so it's moving.
That is so exciting. I cannot wait to read that. As we're talking a little bit about creatures here, I have to say that some of these fake creatures are sexy. And I want to know which one you think is sexiest.
Oh no. Fear and attraction are very confusing sometimes.
Scientifically, they found that sometimes fear makes you horny.
See, it's not just me. Are we talking in the book or just in general?
In general.
Oh no. Oh no, it's like a buffet laid out before me. I like, okay, so if we're talking like historic or like movie monsters, like the creature from the Black Lagoon could probably get it. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Dracula, obviously OG, like he knows what's up. God, just all of them. I'm sorry. I can't help the way I made it. It's Laurel King Hamilton's fault.
I think that's an extremely, if not the only reasonable response, it's a reasonable.
Because you're like, Wolfman, sure, a little bit of hairy, whatever, it's fine. Like, I don't know. It's interesting because like when I read a book that I'm like, oh no, that's too far. It doesn't happen very often. When it does, I kind of cherish it because I'm like, oh, I do have limits. Like I read Den of Vipers and I was like, oh, okay, that was too much for me, and that's okay. So like, you know, it's a gift.
For sure. Also, speaking of a post you saw on Tumblr once upon a time, I noticed a little Easter egg in this book when Evelyn is listing the names of. She has to tell an elaborate lie that she has children, and when she lists the names, I couldn't help but note that they evoked. If you were either on 2010's Tumblr or like really dig the CW, you will know.
Both. It was both for me.
Tell me how media influences your work.
I really like dropping tiny, like, well, for Evelyn in particular, it makes sense. Like, she was trying to do a sob story. Like, I have children, you have to let me
It
go.
tracks for her.
Yeah, and he's like, no, that's not how this works. But of course, he's like, yeah, name your kids then, prove it. And she's like, oh yes, of course, my children, Sam and Dean and Travis. It's just, it amused me because obviously she seems someone who would really consume a lot of pulp culture, and she absolutely would be on like AO3 reading Wincest. Like, you cannot convince me otherwise. And she's my character, so it's canon now. But so it's just, I really like when it's appropriate, and sometimes even when it's not, of kind of dropping little tidbits, like for readers who like, if it doesn't hamper your ability to enjoy it if you don't catch the reference, but if you do, you can be like, I see what you did there. So yeah, or like this is not pop culture, but the ship, one of the ships is called the Audacity, and it's purely because I was on Twitter like, ship names are hard. I was like, honestly, the Audacity, and someone's like, you should do that. I was like, I'm going to. Thank you, Twitter.
Really good. It's a good thing.
And now it's a ship that like you see all the way through the series, so it's fine.
Do you have any books that you're reading right now that you would recommend?
Oh my gosh, guys. This is my favorite part. Okay. All right, so I recently annihilated Elizabeth Stevens' most of her backlist. I started with Dark City Omega, which is fantasy. It's Omegaverse. I'm like, I haven't tried many Omegaverses, and I really like this cover, so I pre-ordered it. It showed up. It's phenomenal, spicy, like Audacity, like goddamn. It felt like it was written just for me, and it was so magical that I was like, okay, I don't really like F with alien romances. I don't know, it's kind of a block in my head. It's weird because I like monsters. But she has a whole 10-book series of alien romances. And I was like, bet, here we go. And I read 4 of them in a row, which I don't do, and they are all amazing, all excellent, all crappy, cannot recommend enough. And then I had to take a little break, and I picked up Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. And all these mofos who lied to me and are like, oh, it's like Harry Potter, but like murder. No, it's not. I mean, yes, magical school, but no, it's not anything. And I'm on the 3rd book, I'm almost done with it. And every choice along the way has been so absolutely perfect and well crafted. And like the fact that the heroine is a complete asshole and never stops being an asshole all the way through is amazing. Even though she's like doing things that are objectively good and doing things that like are objectively like it's a whole thing, but like she's still a cranky bitch, and I love her so much. Anyways, those Elizabeth Stevens, Naomi Novik, those are big ones.
Those are fantastic. I'm gonna check the time just to make sure that we are good. Alrighty, yes, we should.
Probably start winding down and moving over to Q&A. I just have 2 final questions.
Awesome.
One is, do you ever make playlists for your books or characters, or do you ever have like music you associate with characters?
Yes, so I exist on vibes alone, and so I have series playlists because it kind of gets me in like them, like because I dictate, so I can't listen to music while I dictate because I'd start saying the words in the it'd be bad. But I listen to it in between, and so I think all my playlists are actually public on Spotify, but the one for this series is Pirates Gonna Steal Your Girl. But in writing Hunt in Dark Waters in particular, the first like 4 chapters because I sold it on proposal, so I gave like 3 or 4 chapters to the publisher and whatever. I listened to Ginny D's DI, Songs to Drown a Sailor to. It's like a little EP album. It's like 5 or 6 songs on repeat for days on end, and it's still high up on that playlist. And it's just like a couple of them are familiar ones that you would recognize if you listen to like sea shanties and stuff. But she's got some good shit, and it is very atmospheric, and that kind of sums up the core of this series, I would say.
That is delightful. My final question is there are there any questions that you would like to be asked or anything you would like to shout out?
I never know how to answer this because I'm like, let me tell you why Elizabeth Swann was done dirty in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise.
I would love to hear that.
Just, why is that the question? But I'm like, they're like, what do you want to know? Guess what? This one. I have a captive audience. You can't go anywhere right now.
Yeah, let me rephrase my question. How was Elizabeth Swann done dirty?
You cannot convince me that adventuring woman who had spent the entire like 2.5 movies shucking off like the stuff she was supposed to be doing and being off to be a freaking pirate queen suddenly is like, oh, I got knocked up, I guess I'm on land now. And then and then the most recent movie that I refuse to acknowledge exists, like you cannot tell me that she would just let her son go off adventuring. She would have solved that shit decades ago. Like they should just like, she could have been a pirate queen and they could just met up and like done stuff periodically and she would have just been living her life and it would have been wonderful. Betsy was this one, I would have written.
And that would have been metal as hell.
Listen, the third book in this series has an NB or a non-binary pirate captain. It has a lady shifter, and it has a noble himbo. And if those character archetypes sound a little familiar, do what I want, and nobody's telling me no, so I'm doing it.
Well, I must say I cannot wait for what's coming next, and I can't wait for you all to read Hunt on Dark Waters. And on that note, I think I'm going to open it up to some questions from the audience. Feel free to raise your hand. I would also recommend standing up when you ask your questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a mic to take out to you, so it might help you project a little bit.
Don't be shy. Yes, yes.
You have a wide breadth of books, of tropes, of couples. Do you see themes as you're writing and say like evolve from one to the other? Or do you just kind of have the backstock of this is what I want to write about and then move forward?
So I write intuitively, which just means I don't know what's going on until it happens. But I tend to find when I'm grappling with something like a subject or like a theme or whatever, it shows up in my work whether I intended to or not. Like you see a lot of starting with like Dark Olympus, this series and this other thing I'm doing later, that it's like, oh, there's a power structure and it's corrupt and maybe it needs to be toppled. And there's a lot of like family issues that, while don't perfectly mirror my own personal experiences, it's just things that I tend to be grappling with at any given time. There's not a lot of healthy parental relationships in my books, but yeah, I don't usually like set out to like pick something of like, this is the challenge I'm gonna do. It's more that it shows up as I'm writing, and I'm like, oh, or at the end, then when I get edits, my editor's like, this is the great theme, and I'm like, that is the theme that I definitely put there on purpose. So, mostly it's on accident. Yeah, it's great guy.
You read the Anita Blake series by Laurel P. Hamilton. Have you read her Meredith Gentry series?
Oh yes. Oh yes, I have read Meredith Gentry. I am a chronic Frost hater. That probably surprises no one. He's kind of whatever. I might like him more now as an adult. I don't know. But I jumped straight into that series once I annihilated the Anita Blake ones, and I was like, oh, why do I want her to go on the red caps? That's she made me this way. So yes, I have read. She's still writing Anita Blake, and I'm like 10 books behind now, but I will go back to that series at some point too.
Sorry for the double Anita Blake question, but I need to know who your favorite love interest from the Anita Blake series is.
Oh, see, it's always the ones that's like, that guy's toxic and she needs to kill him now. Like the Cookie Monster guy, the guy with the blue hair. I can't remember what kind of shifter he was at the time, but I was like, I love him, and it's just like, he's evil. I'm going to kill him, and I'm like, no. But of like the OGs, like, I mean, I really like John Claude. He's so damn practical. Like he puts up with so much nonsense from all those dummies. They're trying so hard, and he's just like, it's fine. It's fine. Just okay. Figure it out. Yeah, no, I there's so many good ones in like those books where she's like struggling and like, I just don't want to have 20 boyfriends. I'm like, why not? There's some girlfriends in there too. It's great. So, yeah. So, but I think John Claude, just because he is so, and when he stops being patient, that's always my favorite. Yes, John Claude, tell her. Any more? Yes.
So in your first answer, you said the Neon Gods, the series, and something else for later. Can we hear more about something else for later?
Yes. It's not public knowledge. I am doing a Wicked Villain second generation, and it's kind of, while the first series it doesn't really have a through arc that's like super strong. It's more just like, I was like, I'm telling these stories. That's great. The kids does have an arc, and it will have like because Carver City is such a beautiful apple. It's just waiting to be plucked. It's been at peace for so long. So yeah, that's happening. Actually, the first one is going to be in the next Kickstarter. It's Little Red Riding Hood, and it's the Beast trio. It's their only child, and it's a stalker romance. And I'm also working on a 12 Dancing Princesses, but it's one princess. It's fine. That is Jasmine and Jafar's only daughter and youngest child, and it's a white choose. And I listen, no one's telling me no, so I'm just like, and we're gonna do that. I had a lot of feelings after reading Harley LaRose, The Losers, and that is now a book that I'm writing while I grapple with those feelings.
Got another one. I can keep going all night if you need. I love how much you publish as a voracious romance reader. Thank you. But are there any stories that kind of hit the cutting room floor and never see the light of day?
So yes and yes. I'm sorry, Sabine Valley is one of those. I had started it in early pandemic days when I was like, I'm just gonna keep writing so I don't have to deal with my emotions. And unfortunately, that meant I started more series than I should have, and I should have let that simmer a bit longer before I realized that that's not a feasible thing for me to do, is write 7 books that are all menages with overlapping timelines that it's more flashbacks. But yeah, so like that, sometimes I too aggressively start things and then I'm like, oh no, stop that. You don't have energy or time for that. So there are right now probably 6 books in progress that I try not to talk about because I don't want people to get excited because it's going to be in and out of progress for the next couple of years probably, or maybe it'll never be made. I don't know. Sometimes that just happens.
My former comments, I have to say that I love that you write characters that, like you said, are in the gay spectrum, and are unapologetically who they are, and there's no questions or doubts about who and what they are. And I just found that really refreshing to be able to read and see that in your work. Like, no one questions which way they float, if they float in any direction at all. So it's magical and fabulous, and thank you for writing.
Thank you. I mean, I think that there is a lot of room for stories where that is a pain point, because I think that because that's the reality that a lot of us live in, it's very good to have those stories so that people can have that cathartic read through. But I don't want to write them. And so I'm glad to be able to offer kind of this, I guess, oasis of here's what it could be like. And also everyone sleeps with everyone.
So when you're in kind of a writer's slump and you can't get motivation, what do you do to kind of motivate yourself? You mentioned music, but is there anything else?
I have a really interesting mix of ADHD and autism, and so I want different things, but I need structure. And 2 wolves live inside me. Yeah. So normally I'm kind of in a struggling spot right now because I had back-to-back edits and I've done a lot of travel in the last 2 weeks, and so I can't get my rhythm down. But normally, under normal circumstances, I just every day I promise myself because ADHD wants to scatter marbles, and it's all right, we're gonna work for 15 minutes. And if we work for 15 minutes and it's not working, then it's just a day we're gonna call it a loss. But 9 times out of 10, if I work for 15 minutes, especially if I get on my little human hamster wheel, my treadmill, and then I can write until my word count's done. It's just forcing myself to start, but also I have 12 years of practice to realize what works for me, and to know that sometimes if something's a struggle in that particular part of the book, I just skip it and come back for later, because it's usually because I've done something wrong. So yeah, writer's block exists, but I have a lot of ways for me personally to work through it. Yeah, and I'm deeply motivated by deadlines. So I tend to usually sell my books on proposal or put up a book for pre-order or whatever to ensure that there's like some accountability, because while I will fuck off and like disappoint myself, I will die before I disappoint someone else. So, yeah, sometimes you gotta track yourself.
I have that anxiety and ADHD. So anxiety is like, get the thing done, and ADHD is like, hey.
I will say that also anxiety. I will say that like understanding that some days it just won't happen, and it makes more sense just to go do something to refill the well instead of sitting at the computer for 6 hours or whatever to like hammer out 100 words. Like sometimes allowing yourself to have those days where it's like I don't want to say failure because that has like morally coded bullshit in it, but like to be like, no, okay, today ADHD wins, and it sucks. But I also, in my schedule, I don't schedule in weekends as writing days. So when I have those days, I can just be like, oh, I'll just work Saturday. And so it's like, it alleviates some of the anxiety because it's like, no, I do have a buffer built in. And that helps, because otherwise it's like, oh, I should just be doing it. I'll just force myself, and sometimes you can't.
Do you currently have any plans to save any of the Sabi and Valley characters for other books?
Not currently, but I would never say no because things sometimes happen. Like I said, I was working on Wicked Villains, and there's some Romanovs that show up, and I was not expecting that to be a thing that happened. And so, I would never say that it will never happen because my brain is super twisty and it might very well, but I don't have active plans right now.
Because someone already asked my question about neurospicy stuff, so oh, neurospicy here as well. Okay, so I'm trying to. So I wanted to write stories myself, and I was wondering, how do you decide between like self-publishing or going through a publisher, and which one's like the better route as far as that?
So I don't believe that there's one true way to publish, and like anybody who tells you that there is either lying or trying to sell you something. But I would recommend sitting down and kind of deciding like what you want out of your writing career, as far as like how much control you want, how much, or like what genres you're going to write. Like once you know what your ideal writing career looks like, then you can kind of reverse engineer of like, oh, trad is maybe a better route, or independently publishing is a better route, or maybe some mix of the two. And also it's okay to change your mind. So I think that there's a lot of people who put a lot of emphasis on one way or the other as being like the better way to do it. But I don't necessarily think that's true. I think it's just the better way for you. Like right now at this point in my career, I really like trad because I needed someone to force me to slow down because I was burning out really bad. And I've been teetering on the edge of burnout for like 3 years still, but like because of the slower schedule, it's helping me. But there's something to be said for indie as far as being mold. Like no one tells you no, which can be powerful and also like a horrible detriment depending on like the person. So it just really depends like how much control you want to have, that sort of thing. And yeah, and then you, like I said, you could try indie first and be like, nope, this sucks. I don't want to do this anymore, or vice versa. Which is probably not a satisfying answer because it's not really an answer at all. But I would just like kind of figure out like what matters most to you and what a successful career looks like, and then look at the avenues and see what might be the best fit.
What is your favorite trope to read and then your favorite to write?
All right, favorite tropes. This changes every time I'm answering.
Yeah.
Right now in this moment, I love an arranged marriage. Like I love an arranged marriage. I love that like forced intimacy of like being in a relationship that theoretically should be the most intimate, and maybe hating them in the process. But I tend to write that quite often, actually, now that I think of it. And I love enemies to lovers. It's my favorite thing in the entire world. If I could write that till like the end of days, that's what I'll do, and probably what I'll do. Yeah.
I was curious what dictation software you use and what you like about it.
So, I have been on a journey with dictation. I started when my hands started really going out, and I was using Apple native dictation, which I found, I know, but I had trained, like, practice with text, and so I got really used to, like, dictating the formatting and whatnot. And it just worked better than the other ones I had tried for my specific whatever. But once I got really comfortable with that, then now I actually send the audio out to be transcribed. Because cleaning up the dictation was soul sucking, and I was like, I think it probably cost me more in time to do this than it would to have somebody else do it. And a mutual of mine on Twitter, which, XO Twitter, but they had recommended this company, which I cannot remember the name of off the top of my head, but they employ primarily like disabled and chronically ill folks, and they also do like an editing pass for me. Like they have a package so it's just a great fit. And because I have all that foundation of learning to dictate, I can go so much faster. So I almost doubled my speed in the process. But I know a lot of people back in the day like Dragon, but it seems like it's not getting upkept. Yeah, so I use Apple native dictation. That's the one that I landed on.
All right, got time for one more.
Okay.
What inspired you to write the Touch of Taboo series?
So the Touch of Taboo series was, again, in that early pandemic days, and it was a pressure valve. The first one in particular, I had just read Nikki Sloan's Filthy Rich American series, and I was like, am I into father-in-law stuff? Like, it's never been, I thought I had to ask myself this question, and I like grappled with it until I was like, I think I need to write a book in conversation with this, like to get these feelings out. And So Your Dad Will Do was born. And the other 3 books in that series were similarly just like, at that time, my entire family was home, and the only place I could go to escape them was my office, and which meant I'd be interrupted every 15 minutes instead of every 30 seconds. And so I was like, I'm just gonna write smut that has little character, no plot. It doesn't require, it just, like, I had all these like awful emotions, and it was just like, blah. And the blah was sexy. I don't know how So yeah, I have ideas for other ones if the pressure becomes, but that's also not the healthiest way to deal with emotions that you should be feeling. So I don't know if there'll be more of those books, but I'm happy with the 4 we have.
All right, well, I think we're gonna wrap it on up. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's how we're gonna do signing. I'm gonna call you